Good morning and welcome to the Daily Signal. I'm your host, Remo, and it's Monday, June 9th, 2025. Today we're covering a world in motion. From climate activist Greta Thunberg being detained while trying to deliver aid to Gaza, to Russia launching its largest drone attack yet on Ukraine. We'll take you from the depths of a Gaza hospital where a Hamas leader met his end, to the heights of space where Axiom prepares for another mission to the International Space Station. We've got breaking news on Trump's expanded travel restrictions affecting 19 countries, severe weather forming off Mexico's coast, and significant political developments across Europe. Plus, we'll cover a concerning incident at a U.S. military base in Japan and ongoing humanitarian crises that demand our attention. It's a packed 15 minutes ahead, so let's dive right into today's most important stories. Our lead story takes us to the Mediterranean, where Israeli naval forces intercepted a Gaza-bound aid vessel, detaining climate activist Greta Thunberg and several other activists attempting to deliver humanitarian supplies. The 22-year-old Swedish activist was aboard what organizers called a Freedom Flotilla, a small convoy of boats carrying medical supplies, food, and construction materials to the besieged Gaza Strip. Israeli authorities say the vessel violated the naval blockade that's been in place since 2007. This detention comes at a particularly tense moment. Gaza's population of over 2 million has been facing severe shortages of basic necessities, with hospitals reporting critical supply shortages. The activists argued they were providing life-saving humanitarian aid, while Israeli officials maintain the blockade is necessary for security reasons. Thunberg, who gained global recognition for her climate activism, has increasingly turned her attention to Palestinian rights issues. Her detention highlights the ongoing international debate about humanitarian access to Gaza and the effectiveness of current aid distribution mechanisms. The activists are expected to be processed and likely deported, but their actions have already reignited discussions about alternative ways to deliver aid to Gaza's civilian population. Speaking of Gaza, we're learning new details about a significant military development. According to Israeli intelligence sources, Hamas military commander Mohammed Sinwar was killed beneath an EU-funded hospital in Gaza during recent operations. Sinwar, believed to be related to Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, was reportedly coordinating military operations from tunnels constructed below the medical facility. Israeli forces say they discovered an extensive network of underground passages and command centers beneath what was supposed to be a civilian hospital. This revelation raises serious questions about the use of civilian infrastructure for military purposes, a practice known as human shields that violates international humanitarian law. The EU, which provided funding for the hospital's construction, has called for a full investigation into how their development aid was allegedly misused. The incident underscores the complex challenges of urban warfare in densely populated Gaza, where the line between civilian and military infrastructure has become increasingly blurred. It also highlights ongoing concerns about accountability in international aid funding and monitoring in conflict zones. Palestinian health officials dispute the Israeli account, claiming the hospital was treating civilians and that the underground areas were used for medical storage, not military operations. Shifting to U.S. domestic policy, President Trump's expanded travel restrictions took effect overnight, now covering citizens from 19 countries, the most comprehensive travel ban in American history. The new restrictions add several countries to the previous list, including major nations in Africa, South America, and Asia. Unlike previous versions, this ban includes both immigrant and non-immigrant visas, effectively halting most travel from these nations to the United States. The administration says this expansion is based on updated security assessments and what they call insufficient cooperation from these countries in sharing intelligence and biometric data. Critics argue the policy amounts to religious and ethnic discrimination, pointing out that many affected countries have predominantly Muslim or African populations. Legal challenges are already underway, with civil rights groups filing emergency petitions in federal courts across the country. The ban affects an estimated 15 million people who had been planning to visit, study, work, or immigrate to the United States. Airlines report widespread confusion at international airports, with passengers being turned away at boarding gates. Several universities have expressed concern about international students and faculty who may be stranded abroad or unable to return to their studies. The economic impact is expected to be significant, particularly in tourism, education, and tech sectors that rely heavily on international talent and visitors. In Eastern Europe, Ukraine faced what officials are calling Russia's largest single-night drone assault of the war so far. 479 drones launched across multiple regions overnight. Ukrainian air defense systems managed to intercept approximately 280 of these drones, but the sheer volume overwhelmed defenses in several areas. The attacks targeted energy infrastructure, military facilities, and unfortunately, some civilian areas. Kiev's mayor reports that several residential buildings were damaged, with at least 12 civilians injured. Power outages affected nearly 400,000 people across 3 regions, though emergency crews are working to restore electricity. This massive escalation comes as both sides appear to be intensifying their military campaigns ahead of winter. Russia seems to be testing Ukraine's air defense capabilities while simultaneously trying to degrade the country's energy grid, a tactic we've seen repeatedly throughout this conflict. International observers note that this level of drone deployment suggests Russia has significantly ramped up its domestic production capabilities, possibly with assistance from ally nations. The attack also demonstrates how drone warfare is fundamentally changing the nature of modern conflict, allowing for sustained, high-volume attacks at relatively low cost. Ukraine's President Zelensky has renewed calls for additional air defense systems from Western allies, emphasizing that civilian protection remains a top priority. Moving to East Asia, 4 Japanese soldiers were injured in an explosion at a U.S. airbase in southern Japan earlier today. The incident occurred at Kadena Air Base in Okinawa during what military officials describe as a routine training exercise. Initial reports suggest the explosion happened during ammunition handling procedures, though the exact cause remains under investigation. All 4 injured soldiers are Japanese Self-Defense Forces personnel who were participating in joint training operations with American forces. This incident highlights the ongoing complexity of U.S.-Japan military cooperation. Okinawa hosts the largest concentration of U.S. military personnel in Japan, with about 26,000 American service members and their families stationed there. Local Okinawan officials have long expressed concerns about military training safety, given the island's dense population and proximity to civilian areas. This explosion is likely to renew debates about training protocols and safety measures at joint military facilities. Both U.S. and Japanese military leadership have promised a thorough investigation and review of safety procedures. The injured soldiers are receiving medical care and are reportedly in stable condition. The incident occurs during a period of heightened military cooperation between the U.S. and Japan, as both nations respond to growing regional security concerns in the South China Sea and broader Indo-Pacific region. Turning to weather news, Tropical Storm Barbara has formed off Mexico's southwest coast and is being closely monitored by meteorologists. The storm currently has sustained winds of 45 miles per hour and is moving northwest at about 8 miles per hour. While Barbara isn't expected to make landfall, it's generating dangerous surf conditions along Mexico's Pacific coast from Acapulco to Puerto Vallarta. Coastal communities are being advised to prepare for potential flooding and rough seas through the weekend. Mexican authorities have issued tropical storm watches for several coastal states and are particularly concerned about the storm's potential impact on tourist areas during what's typically a busy season for international visitors. This is the second named storm of the 2025 Eastern Pacific hurricane season, which officially began on May 15th. Climate scientists continue to monitor whether changing ocean temperatures might lead to more intense or frequent tropical storm activity in the region. In European news, Italians are heading to the polls today for crucial referendums on citizenship rules and labor laws that could reshape the country's approach to immigration and workers' rights. The citizenship referendum asks whether Italy should reduce the residency requirement for naturalization from 10 years to 5 years, a change that could affect hundreds of thousands of long-term residents. The labor referendum focuses on expanding temporary worker protections and strengthening collective bargaining rights. These votes come as Italy grapples with significant demographic challenges, including an aging population and declining birth rates. Supporters of the citizenship reform argue that easier naturalization could help address labor shortages and integrate communities that have been in Italy for years. Opposition parties contend that faster citizenship paths could strain public services and change Italy's cultural character. The labor referendum has similarly divided opinion between business groups and trade unions. Polling suggests both measures face close votes, with results expected to influence broader European discussions about immigration policy and worker rights in an increasingly competitive global economy. Returning to the Middle East, local officials in Gaza report that 5 people were killed during the distribution of humanitarian aid, allegedly by Israeli forces. The incident occurred as Palestinians gathered to receive food supplies in Gaza City's northern district. Witnesses say the shooting happened when crowds gathered around aid trucks, with Israeli forces claiming they fired warning shots to control what they described as a dangerous crowd situation. Palestinian officials dispute this account, saying the victims were civilians waiting peacefully for food distribution. This tragic incident underscores the dangerous conditions surrounding humanitarian operations in Gaza. Aid workers have repeatedly warned that current distribution methods put both recipients and workers at serious risk. International humanitarian organizations are calling for protected corridors and better coordination to ensure civilian safety during aid distribution. The United Nations has documented several similar incidents in recent weeks, raising concerns about the safety of humanitarian operations in the territory. The deaths have prompted renewed calls for international intervention to establish safer mechanisms for delivering life-saving aid to Gaza's population. Back to the Ukraine conflict, Russian forces are claiming new territorial advances in eastern Ukraine, though these reports are disputed by Ukrainian officials and independent observers. Russian military spokesmen say they've pushed deeper into the Donetsk region, capturing what they describe as strategic positions near several villages. However, Ukrainian forces maintain they've successfully repelled most attacks and that any Russian gains are minimal and temporary. Adding to the controversy, both sides are engaged in a dispute over prisoner exchanges and the handling of soldiers killed in action. Russia accuses Ukraine of failing to return bodies of Russian soldiers, while Ukraine says Russia refuses to acknowledge casualty figures or participate in proper exchange procedures. This disagreement reflects the broader information warfare surrounding the conflict, where competing narratives make it difficult to verify specific claims about territorial control or casualty figures. International observers note that accurate information about frontline developments remains challenging to obtain, with both military censorship and active disinformation campaigns affecting reporting from the region. Finally, some news from beyond our planet. Axiom Space is preparing for its 4th crewed mission to the International Space Station, scheduled to launch later this month. The AX-4 mission will carry 4 astronauts to the ISS for a 10-day stay focused on scientific research and technology demonstrations. This includes experiments in materials science, medical research, and Earth observation that could benefit life both in space and on our planet. What makes this mission particularly interesting is its increasingly commercial nature. Unlike government-run space programs, Axiom operates as a private company, representing the growing commercialization of space exploration. The crew includes astronauts from 3 different countries, highlighting how space exploration is becoming more internationally collaborative and accessible. They'll be conducting over 30 different scientific experiments, including research that could advance cancer treatment and environmental monitoring. Axiom is also using this mission to test technologies for their planned private space station, which they hope to launch in the coming years as the International Space Station approaches the end of its operational life. And that brings us to the end of today's Daily Signal. From Greta Thunberg's detention in the Mediterranean to Axiom Space's preparations for orbit, today's news reminds us we live in a world where local actions have global consequences, and where traditional boundaries, whether geographical, political, or even terrestrial, continue to reshape how we understand current events. The common thread through many of today's stories is the ongoing tension between security and humanitarian concerns, whether we're talking about Gaza aid deliveries, travel restrictions, or military operations. These aren't just policy debates, they affect real people facing real challenges every single day. Tomorrow, we'll continue tracking these developing stories and bring you the latest news from around the world. If today's episode provided value, please share it with someone who might benefit from staying informed about global events. I'm Remo, and this has been the Daily Signal. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow.